Hey again. Today we're going to be talking about the Tri-State Disciples, and this is a very interesting group to me because while a lot of people do consider it to be a cult, other people don't. This is mainly because a lot of cults that are infamous are, infamous because people have gotten killed or murdered or there's been some kind of abuse going on, but the abuse that happened with the Tri-State Disciples is really only conspiracy, and there's no provable cases of murder that happened directly because of this group. The Tri-State Disciples were at their peak in the 80s, and the leader and head of all of the sermons that took place in the ministry was Elijah Hudson, and his wife Carrie Hudson also helped him in a lot of the work. They also had 3 kids, an eldest daughter, a son, and a younger daughter, and together in their later years, they served as a model family for all their followers. They put a lot of weight into traditional family values, and I think they even had a television advert at some point. They were so popular, but they weren't only widespread in their popularity, but they were also loved by the community that they nourished. Elijah was known as an incredibly charismatic and down-to-earth man. Carrie was also very kind and genuine as a person. They were the kind of family who would host a potluck after Sunday sermons. The thing is, though, their kindness seemed to only be a facade for something going on behind the scenes. To really understand this, you have to go back 20 years ago when Elijah Hudson first began his preaching in Gadsden, Alabama. Just a sidebar here, though, if you've never been to the Deep South, or you've never lived here or been raised here, I think it's very important to consider the fact that religion and churches and all of that can be really integral to any person's life, even if they're not a very devoted member of any church. Religion kind of has its own culture here, and a lot of people, by extension, can be very altruistic. This also applied to Elijah, and he really enjoyed doing missionary work and volunteer work and anything that could help his community or communities in need. Through this, he discovered that he was incredibly talented with public speaking, and that's part of what got him into preaching. Preaching was how he met his wife Carrie, but after working in Gadsden, Alabama at this church, this small community of people that he already knew intimately and could only help so much, he began to feel like his work would be better spent somewhere else. His missionary work from his past made him feel called to move and uproot his family to go somewhere else. He was itching to spread his goodwill to places that needed it more, and over the rest of the decade, he would go across Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia. Jacksonville in Alabama he'd go to first, and I believe a number of spots in Tennessee, as north as Nashville and Cookeville as well, and I think as south as Atlanta in Georgia. The longest he could stay in any one place was barely a year before he felt like he needed to move on again, and this was partially due to this calling he felt, and this calling was mostly in part to him feeling like he heard the voice of God. Elijah Hudson would refer to this as many things, as the whisperings of the Holy Ghost speaking to him. He says he usually heard this at night when his family had fallen asleep and he was lying in bed. He would hear God call to him in times of need in the past. It would give him advice and guide him in difficult situations, but now things seem to be a little more sinister. The voice of God told him specifically to fortify himself and his family for difficult times to come. The voice of God also told him to prepare for the end times, and also something important to note, if you don't already know, in the Bible, there are a lot of themes about some kind of doomsday. Take the book of Revelation. It's almost mythical in proportion. It talks of famines and wars and all sorts of things, even mythical beasts coming to earth to kind of warn you for when the end is soon to come. Not every Christian puts a lot of weight into that sort of thing. A lot of people just like to focus on the here and now, but it is a part of the Bible, and it certainly became an important part of Elijah Hudson's thoughts towards religion. These so-called words of God would rattle in his brain for the next few months. It would consume him, really. He would think about how he would need to fortify himself, what kind of end times were to come, and what he could do to prevent it, or at least prepare for it, so maybe his family would be saved. This is where a very clear divergence from reality began in Elijah's mind. And it's also important to consider that leading up to this voice of God, it never really led him astray. It was something that was very much a good presence for him. This guidance had been helpful to him up until now. Who was he to suspect this was anything different? This was something Elijah wrestled with. He considered a lot about stopping preaching entirely just to spend more time with his wife, daughters, and son, but after a while he eventually realized that fortifying his family didn't just extend to the people he shared blood with, but everyone he had met during his missionary work and his preaching counted as his family. There's a popular saying among Christians that we're all brothers and sisters in Jesus, and he took this pretty literally. He took a new approach to fortifying his family by beginning his own ministry. He dubbed them the Disciples of the Tri-State Area, and his family became more involved in his preachings as well. They would seek out any venue they could possibly book and play gospel music. Already devout Christians would come to these venues to listen to the gospel music, and while they were caught off guard, you could say, he threw in a few sermons too. This made up a lot of their religious work in the early 80s, and it honestly drew in a lot of people. Elijah Hudson, while his sermons were emotionally charged and tinged with these hints of the end approaching them, he was still very charismatic, and he really cared for everyone he was talking to. They'd raised lots of money at this point to build their own church, and there was a number of people who were also willing to uproot their lives entirely just to follow Elijah Hudson. In his own church, however, things would take a turn towards this doomsday element. He would talk more about the end of times, and in his church, his ministry, it became a lot more like an echo chamber. The idea that the end of times was upon them, it plagued him, and it was all he really wanted to talk about. He was often pointing out things that happened in the news and trying to connect them to the book of Revelation to prove that there was evidence that the end was upon them. It even got to the point that he would have terrible migraines on stage, supposedly because of the stress of this news and how much it weighed on him. There were points too where he would suddenly become dazed and unfocused, distant almost. His wife would liken it to his brain being pulled light years away to receive some kind of message and then suddenly being thrust back. He would be disoriented for a moment, maybe even unaware of where he was, but when he would come back to, he could just resume his sermons with this same delusional intensity. Some of these episodes too would involve him crying out loud in pain or clenching his head in his hands, and people kind of let this happen all up until the last month of his sermons. That was mainly because he likened these episodes to being intensely religious in nature, some kind of message from God that was being sent to him in that moment. But his last sermon, he fell to the ground unconscious, and he wasn't able to get back up. He went to the hospital, and he never gave another sermon. Why he had to stop preaching so suddenly is kind of kept under wraps by the Tri-State Disciples. I don't think it's actually information they want to be made public, both for the family's sake and for the reputation of the ministry. But whatever is the truth, he was out of commission in terms of preaching, and 3 years later he died quietly and with his family. I believe ownership of the ministry was transferred to a more devoted member, but it didn't really go far. I'm pretty sure the building is abandoned today. Now, the conspiracies surrounding what kind of led up to Elijah's retirement, as well as exactly what was going on in the church while it was active, is that there was a level of abuse in the family that was going on behind the curtain. I mean, with a father who was so relentless about this idea that the world was coming to an end. I mean, I can only imagine what it would be like to live with someone like that. But while a lot of these conspiracies are just really hearsay, there's no way to prove them, what I find most interesting is what happened to the eldest daughter, Natalie Hudson. She, about a month before her father went into hospital, completely removed herself from the church. I think maybe a decade ago now, she even wrote a memoir detailing her experiences with just living with a man like that. I think just the fact she had enough to write a book on it alone is very telling as to how she viewed that time of her life. But yeah, there's just a lot of perspectives to this story that I find fascinating. There's the psychological impact that these kids could have had living with a man like that. With all cult stuff, I think it's also very interesting, and I can kind of relate a lot to it, the experiences, kind of an odd way. I'm still figuring out how to put my finger on, but if anyone watching this has heard of this story or knows any answers maybe I couldn't find, I'd really be interested to see what Elijah Hudson's diagnosis was, but I just really don't think that's public. But if anyone has any more information about this story, I'd love to hear about it. Or if you know of any similar stories, or maybe you have some similar experiences, love to hear about that too. But just for now, thank you, Hannah, for this video recommendation. It's pretty cool. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.